build democratic institutions that can facilitate the work of the movement in an inclusive and a dynamic way. If we can build things today, who's not to say that the things we build today couldn't age to replace the things that exist now that don't work? I don't think we have to look very far to see examples of cooperative institutions that maybe were founded with cooperative intention but have evolved in a way through, being reactive or just, misdirection or what have you, or purpose drift or anything, that are no longer really cooperative with a capital C. So in the UK, there's some clear examples, and I think even our global governance, the International Cooperative Alliance, has even though it has done amazing work that needs to be totally respected and held up, I mean, it has persisted for over a century through 2 world wars, like a global organization that existed through the world wars, where their members were warring with each other, but they stuck together. And decades of response, and they've been effective engaging with global government, which I think is a double-edged sword, but is crazy. Their governance structure has been cobbled together over decades, where it's really rigid and it's almost nearly impossible to be really effectively inclusive. Because the first meeting of the ICA that was ever held on the African continent happened last year in 2013, and it's been around for a century. So it's this is. There are more people on the African continent than on any other continent in the world. And on over 30-member board of directors on the ICA, there's only one representative from the African continent, and that person sits in a mandatory regional representative seat. So they have to be there. That person is there no matter what. And I don't think it's just the rigidity of the voting structure and the representation structure that really has evolved in a way to no longer serve the intention that it set out to meet and fulfill. But yeah, so both the cooperative bank, both the ICA, these are really complex situations and structures. So if there's going to be significant change, it's going to be really hard, and it's going to be really hard if it happens at all. But I think kind of the goal here is to think about if we can just build institutions of our own that are democratic and just, that perhaps they could replace the other ones in the long term, or at least they can just be learned from or replicated in some way to just really demonstrate that we can do national and international organizing in a way that holds true to our cooperative identity, that we don't have to fall into a mold of global government or uber representational structures that are kind of the hallmark of uncooperative institutions. But yeah, on a smaller but no less significant scale is the individual work to do reformation and replacement. So we need to focus really on education and training, principle 5, but focus on that for all young people. So if the opportunity comes up for a young person to enter into a cooperative institution or workplace, that they can bring a really strong hold on democracy and process and the cooperative identity in a way that they can affect and influence that cooperative or that institution for the better. And I think we need to either have, a coordinated number of folks or just a critical mass of people who are doing this, because the whole I'm going to change it from the inside thing is kind of a trite notion as an individual.
Very sorry, can I interrupt you for a second? I just want to get my shoes.
Yeah.
Maybe waiting.
Okay, sorry. Right. Okay. All right, it's all right. Thanks. See you tomorrow.
Bye. But if there's more than one of us, and we're a whole group, that we actually have the opportunity and the potential to impact. And a quote's really fitting here that a lot of cooperativists I know really like, and it's from an American cultural anthropologist, just like kind of world famous right now. But Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So in thinking about that, it's like, well, if we got a critical mass, if we had so many young people educated in the cooperative identity and democracy, we would effectively be kind of salting our institutions. So if you're familiar with labor terms, I don't know if it's US specific labor terms, but you salt a workplace when you go and you apply to work at a workplace in order to organize it and change it. So to kind of apply these labor strategies to our movement could be totally effectual. And while we're at it, if we're educating and training people, it wouldn't hurt to send them into more conventional or uncooperative institutions, because there's an opportunity for conversions there, or maybe just to make them a little bit more humane. But yeah, so to move on from this replacement and this reformation thing into thinking about control. So if we're reforming things and we're creating our own institutions to replace the existing ones that are broken, we need to make sure that they are owned by us and controlled by us. So as I experienced really directly in my work with the housing cooperative system and looking at my professional peers, is that just doesn't work. Having an adult manage or an elder manage youth people and their assets and what they own is really ineffectual. So in a really pragmatic way, in a really pragmatic function, what that means for me here is that we need to manage ourselves, not be managed. So we've got to hire ourselves to do our collective work in our federations and in our cooperatives. So like hire young people to staff young people organizations. And we've also got to put limits or parameters around staff structures, staff terms, and governance terms. So sometimes at the ICA level, for example, we have a youth council, and there are folks that are like up to age 40 that are grandfathering into the position and still representing youth. So that's not always a great thing to do. But so we're doing this Reformation reform, and we're controlling our own enterprises. Kind of what do we do then to staff and stock our enterprises? So we need to focus on the redistribution of wealth within the cooperative movement. So that might be a phrase or term that you know in other contexts, but it really does mean very literally there are different kinds of wealth the cooperative movement has at the elder end and at the big co-op end that needs to be redistributed to the young people. And the people are making change and building new structures and institutions. So I mean this on like the financial and like the information and relationship side. On the financial side, I'm talking about just grants, that we need more grants, not free money, but like we just need money and wealth to flow back to the projects that the youth are doing in order to kind of get them off the ground. Let me get back onto it. And one example of this working is there's our top co-op, our largest co-op in the United States, is a farmer co-op that is a leader and is really unique and rare, is because they're really the only one in the U.S. that does this, is that they give a lot of money outside of the agricultural sector to young people specifically and to just plain cooperative endeavors because they understand the power of the model beyond just the immediate work that they're doing. So we owe them and their funding and their grant making essentially to the creation of why we now have a U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops that's growing exponentially year after year. We also owe them for funding NASCO in good times and bad through many, many years. And they also last year gave $2 million just to like try to give to people to try to figure out how to get cooperative education into institutions of higher education in the United States. And this is the big thing that ruffled some feathers even, in Canada too. So like they're extending well outside where they are in so many ways because I don't think they would call it funding the movement, which is kind of how I think about it. But I think they definitely see that their giving is towards a much more profound impact and a much more profound end than just seeing a program come to fruition or funding something for a year. That I think that they really do have this understanding of the power of the cooperative model and that they want to see it grow and to grow the Commonwealth. So we need to hold cooperatives like that up and really be like, yeah, this is great. And hold other co-ops. This is CHS Incorporated. And I can talk a little more because it's also a double-edged sword, when you think about co-ops that are that big too. Like there's some accountability that needs to happen both ways. But we need to get other co-ops to give in the same way and to just see that solidarity is a function of cooperation and that redistribution of wealth within the cooperative movement is vital for the movement's health. And so on the other side, this kind of education and expertise and know-how comes in the terms of mentorships through personal relationships. So there's a lot of wealth and assets that are held in relationships and access to communities and specific conversations that elders have that need to be passed on to young people. And so mentorship, like one-on-one kind of relationships tend to be what has been demonstrated to be the most effective in redistributing that informational wealth down here to give power, perspective, and history to young people so we can effectively and responsibly do the building for that reformation and replacement work that we need to do, and do it in a way that's respectful. And by engaging elders in this way too, we engage elders in the work and not divide them or alienate them, which is really important because we do need our cooperative elders and we do need our cooperative institutions to do our work. I think that we just have to be really clear in saying that we're only going to have the impact and be effectual if we control it. So it's definitely an exercise of faith and solidarity at a certain point. So moving on to networks and assets kind of together. It's like, so say we get all the wealth, we've got it like the wealth flowing in the movement in a way that causes it to expand and is building from the bottom and is feeding the grassroots. And we're building these cooperative institutions that are democratically managed and controlled by youth. So how do we keep going from there? Because we have to build from there. So it's about creating our own assets. And the number one big asset that is not financial would be our networks. And that we need to coordinate together and build a kind of a sub-movement of young people and students doing cooperative work. And to do this sub-movement, we really have to kind of focus in our own spaces and our own identities. So I think it was it Maya Angelou? Or it was someone who said, like, if you dig deep enough in your own soil and tell your story, everyone with every other kind of soil will understand what you're talking about. So like organizing in a really student-centric space is really wonderful and is a way to get far quickly because you have a lot of shared goals and grievances. You also have access to institutional resources and other things, but you have to create bridges beyond that narrow identity with other identities and with other folks in order to create a rich network and a robust network of young people. So in the U.S. we decided to go with the youth, but we also are building bridges specifically outside of the youth to like the 30 to 40-year-olds. We're calling them literally bridge members because they're kind of half in the youth world, half in the adult world, and are starting to have access to spaces and conversations that young people typically don't have. So it's all about kind of widening out your realm of influence as much as you can, and kind of diversifying your knowledge and what you have access to. Okay. And so then, I'm getting a little tired, so try to tidy this up really quickly. So yeah, if we have these networks, which is an asset, next thing that's really concrete is we need financial assets. We need them to strengthen and embolden and fuel our network of relationships. And I'm really pleased to see how Students for Cooperation is approaching this work, actually, in terms of like building up enterprises that are going to be assets that are then going to have the investment, the kind of this emotional investment to want to be dues-paying members to the Federation, kind of in the longer term. But at the same time, there's always a rub to that, because 10 years from now or what have you, that organization might find itself misaligned values-wise with the Federation, might want to but doesn't like something the Federation is doing, or they might not even have enough money to pay dues. So what do you do in that instance? And so that's why I'm really excited too to see the way the Students for Cooperation is looking towards the housing sector and property acquisition as a potential way to kind of complement having these enterprises that are federated. Because building land assets and property assets is a real way, a proven way to build power in an organization and a federation. So in the U.S. we have two spectacular examples of folks using this strategy. The first is the Federation for Southern Co-ops, which has been around for over 40 years and was created to help low-income people in the southern U.S. Create cooperatives. And so they saw the protection and expansion of the land holdings of black family farms to be fundamental to this work in order to maintain space, place, and power, because institutionalized racism and classism resulted in black folks being slighted and oppressed in every way imaginable, from having people manipulate land titles to take family land out of the hands of the rightful owners, to the practice of segregation with a capital S, which I with trust. You're familiar with that part of U.S. history. But yeah, so they have for over 40 years been building up this landmass that has weathered them through good times and bads, and that's really why that federation is, I mean, and I don't even feel bold saying this, is never going to go away, because they do have so much power to leverage. The other example is NASCO, which is kind of great and is at the other end of the spectrum. So another component of NASCO is this other entity that's called NASCO Properties, and it's an asset holding nonprofit. So there are a bunch of cooperative houses throughout the United States that NASCO Properties owns, and each cooperative has one representative on the board of directors that manages that cooperative. That asset mass and the income from those properties has also weathered NASCO through over 40 years. Well, they haven't been around for the whole time, but has weathered through decades of time with NASCO in good times and bad, because they effectively subsidize NASCO's entire family of operations and endeavors. So that is also, I think, in many ways why NASCO has been around for so long, and also probably why NASCO will be around forever. Like, you can cut it down to the bare bones, but they'll still have that to keep churning. So it is really, really a fantastic way to hold power. The problem with the NASCO model, though, so I would love to see if you folks can figure out a solution, is that there's only a small portion of members that own and manage the property in NASCO Properties of the larger NASCO membership. So they can't effectively redistribute this power and share it through the network, and it's only a few members that hold that power. So it's potential that that power could actually be used to agitate within the federation, within the NASCO Federation. It hasn't. I think it would require a lot of internal organizing to do so to date. But if that could be done in a way that distributed that wealth and the power and the control over the wealth throughout the entire network, that would be amazing. And that's what the federation has done. So that's part of what is just, federation is wonderful for other reasons. If anybody ever wants to talk about them, I would love to. They're really perfect. But I'm super excited to see where Students for Cooperation goes in terms of asset building to support their federation, because I think there's a lot of historic lessons to learn from in order to guide kind of that future. But yeah, so I'm going to start closing it up. And thank you again for bringing me here and letting me share, even though I am delusional and a little bit long-winded, I think, at this point, from what I've learned working through the years. And I think that there's a lot that we can accomplish together, even across an ocean, and I think we should keep our relationship strong, even if it is just in email threads and conversations, or book recommendations, or sending a couple people something in North America and sending folks here. I know I'm working with Sean and some other folks in Europe to try to get a European coordinate council of young people kind of going, or at least talking, so they can inform the international conversations. So, I really want to keep in touch and keep this going. And I think that we need to work together on a global scale, because we really do want to make a better cooperative movement, and frankly, just a better world. And so kind of as a tie-in to where I started with how hellish it was to get here and why I am so delirious at this point, is that the reasons why all my flights were canceled were because of severe weather systems that were happening both in the US and here. And that's 4 times, that's 4 different days where there was such a severe weather occurrence that are increasing and strengthening, is that our institutions that we've built to manage the impacts of climate change are really too rigid and are pretty damn ineffectual. And frankly, I think that a lot of those people, the reason why folks maybe aren't as up in arms about making change, about looking at 2050 when the UN has said that if we don't change our production methods, that the demand for food will outpace supply of food. Because the people that are having the conversations aren't going to be around in 2050, that there isn't a real reason, we're not youth that have nothing to lose, and that's why we have the energy to get angry about things and demonstrate, but I think it's because we have everything to use. Everything to lose, and everything to use, too. But I don't know, that was just kind of a profound observation that I had. So we've got to do this work in the cooperative movement in order to impact and have effect in these larger spaces, too. But to close finally, I want to harken back to Father Arizmendi, who is kind of attributed to be the father of Mondragon, which is the world's largest worker cooperative in the Basque region of Spain. So he felt that the basis for cooperative community and philosophy was education and youth. And while Mondragon is now like a global player and a big economic actor and a worker co-op, it was first and foremost a university. So I think it's particularly auspicious and to think of that and to think of being in this event here today with students in a university setting looking to build infrastructure to create a movement that can fuel a better world. And I think that speaks volumes. And it's our responsibility to be strategic and intentional about organizing ourselves to support our movement. And so it's really powerful to be here where people are organizing themselves with intention and responsibility to build a movement here in the UK to impact elsewhere. So yeah.
Really good, awesome. I don't know, never had so much craft theory in one go. But